computed tomography, CT scans, and so forth.
But that's actually looking at an exact something. A CT scan is looking inside the body. So, and blood work is actually taking a sample, so you're getting something more accurate. So to me, a monitoring, which is taking an actual air sample, would be a more accurate way of watching this. But anyway, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Corlew, proceed.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kissel, for your testimony here today. You made a statement that the utility has been in violation for years with regard to SO2. What is that statement based on?
Well, it was a very interesting article in the Post-Dispatch in December. They talk about this issue, and it was only then that there was a proposal to put more than a single SO2 monitor there. But for example, they said the EPA tightened 1970 limits on the pollutant in 2010, setting a limit of 75 parts per billion. In 2013, sulfur dioxide concentrations in Herculaneum averaged 136 parts per billion. That's almost twice the upper limit through the first 9 months of the year, according to DNR monitoring data. They reached a high of 198 parts per billion during that time, and in 2012, there had been recorded at more than 5 times the federal limit. So that's the basis for my statement.
From the Post-Dispatch article?
Yes, on December 26, 2014.
Thank you. And you also mentioned studies that you have regarding specific illnesses that you attribute to SO2. Where do you these studies taken from the geography of the specific source that is at issue in this bill?
No, I don't think so. Their studies have been done around the country and around the world, but I don't know that any have been done in Franklin County.
And isn't it hard to argue with the fact, and I recognize your testimony generally, but as it pertains specifically to this bill, isn't it hard to argue with the actual, especially from the standpoint if you're concerned with illness and possible carcinogens and things like that, isn't it hard to argue with obtaining actual data to be able to monitor that as opposed to modeling data?
Well, we've had data from Franklin County for years. I mean, it's not that there isn't data there. The data has consistently shown Ameren to be in violation of the standards. So, sure, you need data in order to make decisions, but you don't need another 3 years of data to figure out that there's a problem there in Franklin County.
Okay, so your issue isn't with the monitoring versus the modeling as opposed to the time frame?
I think there's enough data that there don't need to be further delays.
Wouldn't you agree, though, that having ongoing data would be better, continual data?
Sure, but I don't think we should delay action just to collect more data for another few years.
Thank you, Doctor.
Doctor, now you've sparked my interest for just a moment. I want to follow up a little bit on the exchange you had with Representative Corlew to make sure I understood it correctly. You mentioned some statistics from Herculaneum, and I missed the part. Were those were SO2 measurements?
This monitor is located near Herculaneum, so they're referring to the single SO2 monitor in Franklin County.
Okay, and what struck me though was when you said Herculaneum, I grew up not too far from there, and I know that plant kind of polluted more than anything. So my question to you is, I guess those readings were more readings from an ambient perspective?
There were, and now that plant, the lead smelter, has closed over a year ago now. So there is data available. Ameren has that data on the monitoring of SO2 levels with the lead smelter now being closed, but they haven't yet released them to anyone else other than themselves.
Very good, thank you. Any other questions from the committee? Doctor, again, thank you for your testimony. Anyone else testifying in opposition to Bill 1084? And again, sir, please don't forget to fill out a witness form.
Sure.
And you can proceed when ready.
Thank you. Again, my name is Andy Knott. I'm a campaign representative for the Sierra Club. We are opposed to House Bill 1084 because the bill gives Ameren sole discretion as to whether modeling or monitoring is used by DNR to develop a plan to control SO2 emission at the Rush Island plant. Modeling is more accurate and more protective of public health because it actually shows what the air quality levels are across the geographic region that is modeled, as opposed to just at the monitor location. So our concern is, will there be enough air monitors placed? Will they be in the correct locations to show what the air quality is in the region? And will there be public input into where those are located? DNR is going through a process now under the current SO2 standard to deal with the sulfur problem in Jefferson County. And as of a month ago, actually not just Jefferson County, but also Franklin County near the Labadie plant, as of about a month ago, Ameren had only proposed one monitor for each of those locations. This is the first I've heard that 3 was today. And DNR also doesn't allow public comment on where those monitors are located. This bill, has been pointed out, it also precludes DNR from submitting a new SO2 non-attainment designation before July 1st, 2020, even if doing so would protect public health, which it would. DNR recently drafted a state plan. It's going to go out in the next month or so for public input to deal with the Jefferson County non-attainment area under the existing sulfur dioxide standard. We believe that the way that plan has been developed is flawed and will invite disapproval by the EPA. So our concern is if this bill is passed and becomes law, and it actually ties DNR's hands by allowing the use of monitoring only, there's no deadline for when they would start that monitoring. Then there's another 12-month lag while they collect data before DNR can do anything. This could potentially also invite a federal plan from EPA. Also, I think that Ameren is arguing that this is cheaper because essentially they think that monitoring is going to allow them to not install these control devices that are actually needed to reduce pollution and that actually reduce the health impacts. I mean, that's the argument. It's not whether monitoring and modeling is cheaper. It's actually long-term effects in terms of actually reducing the pollution that is the concern on their part. And in terms of saying that this preserves flexibility, it's really preserving flexibility for themselves and taking that flexibility away from DNR, and that's our concern. So that's the case for our opposition. The bill limits DNR's options for developing an adequate plan and delays attainment of the SO2 clean air standard. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the witness? Representative Berry.
To inquire.
Proceed, please.
So, if this takes place, the federal might do a FIP instead of a state. Is that what you're saying?
We think that the current rule that DNR is about to propose in the next month, the way that they developed it, they're only looking at attainment issues in a very small portion of Jefferson County. We think that that will invite a possible, that might be disapproved by EPA.
Okay, and from your standpoint, wouldn't you be happy with that?
Unless it just results in more delay. I mean, I think that we'd rather see DNR always have control over what they're doing, and that allows more flexibility. That's how the Clean Air Act is set up, is that it sets standards that states have to comply with, but then states develop their own state plans that give them flexibility in how they do that. We think that's the way to go.
Okay, and so if DNR said we wanted to be monitoring rather than modeling, you'd be perfectly happy with that?
I think we'd be happy to have that debate with DNR in the normal process that we have with public input.
But that didn't answer my question.
Well, I think it would depend on whether we thought that the monitors were in the right location and whether or not there were enough monitors.
But you just said that DNR is the state and the plan that they come up with is better than the federal. And so if DNR came up with the places to put out, without Ameren's input, let's just say DNR did that, without your input either, you'd be okay with that?
We do think that DNR should have public input on where these locations are.
Okay. So you didn't answer the question.
Sorry.
If DNR was in charge of putting the monitors out, not the Sierra Club, not Ameren, you would be for that or against that? Yes or no?
I can't answer that because it depends on where they put the monitors.
You're really sort of talking out of both sides of your mouth, and that's what's frustrating about this, in that either you want them to do it or you don't want them to do it, or you want them to do it your way.
So our preference is modeling. Let me just say
Okay.
that. Yes.
That's what you
Yes.
needed to answer.
Yes. Our preference is modeling. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Any further questions? Before we proceed, let me just ask, how many other folks are here to testify in opposition? Informational purposes? Okay. Representative McNeil, proceed.
Thank you, Jim Clark. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Thank you for coming. So let's say we do go the modeling, the monitoring route. And is 3 monitors adequate and, in your opinion?
Well, this is the first we've heard of this. It's certainly better than 1. I think, again, it depends on the locations and the supporting documentation as to where they would go.
And you also, you or Dr. Kissel implied that, that this focus on SO2 is a result of a problem that has come forth. Is that right, or is this nationwide effort to cut down on SO2 emissions?
There's been sulfur dioxide standards for many years, many decades in terms of ambient air quality. So, and it has been addressed over the years in different ways. There are new standards coming out.
Oh, okay, so these are new standards. And so it's not that there was a problem that was noted at Dr. Kissel said Rush Island Power Plant.
Yeah, so there is a sulfur dioxide, what they call a non-attainment area, meaning they're not attaining the ambient air quality standard for sulfur dioxide in a large portion of Jefferson County. And the modeling that we have seen, some of the modeling that DNR has done shows that part of that is caused by the Rush Island plant.
And could part of it have been caused by the Doe Run plant
Sure.
as well?
Yes.
And do you think the data could be from that year when the Doe Run plant was still operating?
Sure, that was part of it, but again, modeling has shown that there are still problems in Jefferson County, and part of those problems are caused by the Rush Island plant.
And in your knowledge of how other states are handling monitoring versus modeling, but if they're doing the monitoring, this is usually done not by the utility and more by the State Department of DNR, you know.
In the past, state environmental agencies have run air monitoring networks, and for the most part. And over the years, those have been cut back, usually due to budget cuts. And so we've seen a decline in air quality monitoring over the years. I think what we're seeing now is a resurgence in that, and that's part of this discussion. But with the lack of monitors, that's when modeling has come into play, and they've become more accurate over time as well.
So basically, to ask our Department of Natural Resources to monitor will be an expense that we'd incur on our budget. Therefore, you know, but giving it over to the utilities, to Ameren, is, I can see, you know, there is the illusion perhaps, of some, things perhaps being,
My understanding is that under the new programs that, that would allow for more monitoring, that the utilities would be asked to pay for those or help pay for those. It's a question of allowing them to decide whether that's the way to go and where to locate them. That's the concern.
all right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Representative Remley?
Inquire. Are you saying Ameren is out of compliance?
We are saying that the Rush Island plant is causing part of the non-compliance issue with the ambient air quality standard in Jefferson County. We're saying that that is part of the problem.
Are you basing your information on like a St. Louis Post-Dispatch info?
We're basing that on modeling that the DNR has done and that we have done.
Ameren, they have supplied me with information that's in paper, and hands-on, that they are in compliance.
Yeah. If I could respond, we're not saying that the actual, this was discussed at the very beginning of this conversation. I think when Ameren was up here, the question was asked, monitoring at the stack, what's coming out of the smokestack versus the ambient air monitoring. We're not saying that the Rush Island plant at the stack is causing a violation in terms of what's coming out of the stack. What we're saying is that the ambient air monitor, which is how you measure the health impact on the community, that monitor is out of compliance because of SO2, and then a big portion of that is caused by the Rush Island plant. So it's not as if DNR could go and give Ameren a citation and say you're in violation. This is a broader question about the broader impacts, about the compliance of the whole area.
Okay.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Anybody else testify against House Bill 1084? Seeing none, anybody to testify for informational purposes for House Bill 1084? Seeing none, that'll conclude the hearing for House Bill 1084. Representative Berry, if you are ready, we can resume the hearing on House Bill 481. And noting that it's about 9:35, to be courteous to our members, I'd like to conclude the hearing about 10 till 10. And then Representative Berry, I guess if we need to continue it for additional testimony, we can touch base with the chairman and see what he'd like to do. But thank you for your indulgence on this. Anyone else testify against House Bill 481?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Trey Davis, President and Registered Lobbyist with the Missouri Energy Development Association. Pertaining to this bill, the three companies that would be impacted by any changes to net metering would be Ameren Missouri, Kansas City Power and Light, and Empire District Electric Company, all three which are part of our association that I represent. For the indulgence of the committee, I will keep my comments brief so we can work to conclude today. Somebody playing Pac-Man? Could be me, I don't think so, but anyway, apologize for that. Mr. Stewart and Mr. Ramsey did a very nice job. While the co-ops and the municipals are obviously different than the investor-owned utilities, they did a very good job in outlining not only how the process works, but also the general concerns that we share as well with the subsidization issues and the issues of fairness when it comes to rates. Now our companies, I didn't hear this a lot 2 weeks ago outside of the comments of the sponsor, but I didn't hear a lot last week about what this bill would do to protect customers and to benefit customers. And at the end of the day, that is a primary concern of the members that I represent. As we move forward with distributed generation, as we move forward with net metering, which are items that we do support, we need to look at the fairness and the impact on all customers as we move forward, especially if we look to expand such programs or go in a new area in terms of expanding the kilowatt cap as we go to change the process internally. That's where our concerns come into play with this language. But I want to take a quick step back and just let you all know You know, there has been a lot of effort spent by the companies that I represent to invest in our grid, to invest in distribution and transmission that is beneficial for all customers, not just in distributed generation and renewables, but outside of that as well. What that has led to is some of the lowest electric rates in the country. As of October 2014, we were paying basically the customers for the companies that I represent in this state, residential, commercial, industrial, transportation, all sectors across the board, we're paying roughly 8.47 cents per kilowatt hour, one of the lowest in the country. The result of that is because of our focus on low-cost generation. A lot of that has to do with our investment in coal, but also it's a diverse portfolio and looking to transition that as we have with distributed generation, renewables, et cetera. A couple areas where I think we're really pushing the envelope to benefit our customers has been investments in areas like solar, which is a primary discussion we've had as part of distributed generation and net metering. Kansas City Power and Light, for example, they've installed solar panels on Paseo Academy in Kansas City. 100 kilowatts of energy that's not only benefiting the grid, but also teaching young children there about the impact of investing in solar and how that can work to benefit not only customers, but the grid as well. They've also installed a 120-panel solar system on the roof at the Kansas City Royals baseball stadium. That's one of the largest, that is the largest solar array in Major League Baseball. Once again, an opportunity to not only showcase the investment in that technology, but also showcase what our state and our companies are doing to benefit their customers. Ameren Missouri has just brought online the state's largest investor-owned utility-scale solar facility. 5.7 megawatts of energy are being delivered to their customers. Ameren Missouri also in 2010 installed 100 kilowatts of solar voltaic technologies on their downtown St. Louis headquarters. Once again, investments that make sense for their customers and can also educate their customers on the benefits of a diverse portfolio. When we talk about investments in solar rebates, which is an aspect of net metering, obviously from what happened in 2008 with the passage of the Renewable Energy Standard, part of that benefit back to customers was in solar rebates. You install solar, you get a rebate. It started as $2 a watt, now it's $1.50 per watt, a rebate that comes back to you. Since 2008, Ameren has issued over 1,800 rebates, totaling over $90 million. They are now at a point where they have hit their 1% spending cap that's mandated by law in the Renewable Energy Standard. Kansas City Power and Light, since 2012, has issued over $75 million in solar rebates. So, Representative McNeil, you asked earlier kind of what's the survey, what's the popularity. It's very popular, but also as you issue those rebates, someone has to pay for them. And that's when we get to the issue of fairness and across the board equality when it comes to rate structures for all customers. And that's really our concern today. The way that the regulatory system is set up, the way that our customers and our cost structure is designed, to move forward fairly, you must pay fairly for what service you're getting back. You must pay fairly and equitably for the grid that is providing safe and reliable service to our customers. Everyone has a role in that. Everybody wants to turn their lights on, everybody wants to turn their microwave on, everybody wants to plug in their iPad. Well, everybody should pay fairly and equitably for that. That is our challenge with the way that the language is written right now. If we are to move forward with expansion of the cap for usage of net metering, or if we're to change the structure in terms of what customers are able to buy back at a retail level versus a wholesale level, we get into a large cross-subsidization issue. There is a large percentage of that money that is collected and received by net metering customers that is paid for by the rest of the non-net metering customers on the system. And we have to address that rate structure to make sure that it is fair and equitable for all members that pay into the electric grid and receive their safe, reliable service. We also need to look at how we address the fixed cost portion of that as well. As was mentioned previously, our rates are a little higher, but on average we have a fixed cost anywhere from $70 to $80 per utility bill. That's transmission, distribution, meters, energy efficiency programs, low-income programs, you name it. Those are costs that are incurred every day by every customer to pay for a safe, reliable grid. we have to make sure that we're able to recover those costs, but also that those costs are assessed fairly and equitably for all customers on the system. So we appreciate Representative Berry bringing this issue forward. We'd obviously like to work with him and the committee on ways that we can address these concerns. Like I said, it's similar to the cooperatives. And with that, due to time, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Gentlemen, just real quick, I don't think it takes a rocket science to figure out that we incentivize a lot of things that our energy industry does. And if we didn't do that, it wouldn't be economically feasible for them to do it and it pass the cost on to you and me. In this arena, well, I know some things are expiring, some things are continuing. Do you have any suggestions? I know you're against the bill, but suggestions that might assist moving towards the goal of the bill?
I don't have a specific suggestion today for you, but we're not just saying, I'm not just saying that and stepping away from the table. Obviously, we've got to look at the rate structure issue. How do we not only deal with the phase out of the solar rebate, which is occurring right now, that's why it's dropped from $2 a watt to $1.50 a watt, and that's going to drop over the next number of years. But we've got to address that subsidization issue. And how do you then, so not only make sure that we've got rates that are fair and equitable for all users of the grid, but then also how do we address that fixed cost portion? Because the way that the system works right now, when we have to buy back that power at a retail rate, that customer is essentially not having to pay for the fixed cost of the grid. Somebody has to pay for that. So I think there's ways, and Representative Berry's mentioned this before when you talk about fairness. I think there's ways to do that. There's ways that other states have addressed this. We're not the only state that's dealing with net metering. There's over 40 states that have some version of it, but as you can imagine, every one of them is a little different. And every situation is different. So I think there's other states that have looked at innovative ways to do that. There's ways of doing a demand charge, a way to recover those fixed costs in different charges or mechanisms. So I think there's options out there, and we're happy to keep discussing those.
Thank you. We have about 5 minutes left. Any further questions for this witness? Representative Bondin? Corlew, sorry. Bondin was sitting here. I don't know where you went. Please proceed.
Thank you. You mentioned the retail, paying back at the retail. Is one of the problems with that you have or perceive of the bill is the language that calls for a ratio of 1-to-1 payback?
Yes, I think so, and it gets to the core issue of how do you not only assess those costs fairly, but how do we go about recovering them? And right now, the way of going about and recovering those is they're recovered from other customers that are not essentially receiving the same so-called benefit as the net metering customers. They're paying for the same grid, but yet they're not able to sell their power back at a retail rate, and we have to buy it whether we need it or not. Right. In most cases, we don't need it.
Is there any difference between the current language of the current law of avoided fuel costs versus a 1-to-1 ratio? Are those the same thing?
That I would have to check on. I don't have the answer for you today, but I'm happy to check on that for you.
Okay, and then I guess following up with the chair's question is with regard to the ratio, do you have a what would be a more fair ratio to you or to your interest? Is there a better ratio instead of 1-to-1? Have you done any looking at what would adequately repay for the costs of the fixed costs and still fairly compensate the customer?
I don't have that answer for you today, but that has been something we've talked about internally. Obviously, we've looked at and are looking at what other states are doing, and I'm happy to talk with my folks and then come back to the sponsor and the committee and talk about if there's options out there that are doable, what they might look like.
Okay. And then one more question. The current statute does have, in Section 3, Sub 1, there is somewhat of a, it seems of a safeguard to deal with some of the concerns that you have, and that is that a 5% of a utility single-hour peak load is all that's required from what I see, and that there's at some point that you can or a utility can deny interconnections if it gets to be a certain percentage. Am I reading that correctly?
Yes, I think you are, but obviously, there's a change in that now with the expansion of the cap in terms of what size of a user can utilize that. So the concern is yes, you still have that safeguard there, but you have larger systems and larger users that get on. All of a sudden, that subsidization, that fixed cost issue is going to get much larger. So how do you balance the safeguard with the expansion in the cap that's in this current language?
Okay. I appreciate it, and you know, I think so. A number of the questions have been with regard to, you know, how we can move forward, yet be fair to both parties, so or all parties involved. I think some of the information that you may be able to provide in terms of what you would see as a you know, absent killing the legislation, what, you know, what would you suggest to be fair would be helpful to the committee?
Happy to do that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Any further questions for the witness? Thank you, gentlemen. How many more folks do we have testifying in opposition? Come on up. Informational purposes, anyone? Proceed, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bob Jackson, representing City Utilities, Springfield, Missouri. We kind of, we agree with what the co-ops say. And what Trey was talking about is the transfer of costs from the affluent customers to low-income customers. We have 110,000 electric customers in Springfield, Missouri. We generate our own power. We have right now at this time 15 who net meter. One of the reasons they probably haven't done much of this, we have some of the lower prices in the state of Missouri. We started a solar farm last summer. We don't own it, but we buy power from, it's on a 40-acre site. It's about 5.5 megawatts. And people can purchase solar power from our solar farm. But there goes back to what Trey and Brent were saying. There's this transfer of power or transfer of cost, and we do have fixed costs with poles, transmission lines, power generation, and employees. So we would at this time oppose the bill.
Thank you. Any questions for the witness? Seeing none, in light of the time, we are going to recess this hearing to a time later to be determined by the chairman. Representative Miller, thank you once again for your indulgence and patience. Yeah, I'm just looking at you to say, and Representative Berry, thank you once again for your indulgence and patience. That's why
we don't let you up there, Real.
Hey, you gotta admit, I did all right.